Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to the Liberty Report. You're probably expecting to see Ron Paul's face, but Ron Paul is traveling today, so I will be doing double duty. Thank you all for tuning in. Today, I've got a special guest with me, someone I've worked with for over a decade, I guess, from Ron Paul's congressional office and now at the Ron Paul Institute. Please help me welcome Ron Paul Institute Senior Fellow Adam Dick. Adam, are you there?
I am. Hello, Daniel.
Hi. Now, Adam, we're going to talk a little bit about an issue that won't go away. We've talked about it a lot on this show. I think it is so critically important. It goes to the heart of what it means to live in a free society, and that is the iPhone issue. As we know, back in December, there was a mass shooting in San Bernardino. The two shooters were apparently tied somehow to terrorism, although that tie seems slightly dubious. But if you remember, a work phone of one of the shooters was left at the attack, and the FBI then demanded ultimately that Apple rewrite some new code to allow them to get into and defeat the encryption built into this Apple product. Now, you wrote an article on the Ron Paul Institute website a few days ago called "The Terrorist iPhone Snow Job." It sounds to me, Adam, like you don't believe what the FBI is saying. So can you give us kind of a rundown of your article and what you think it means?
Well, to understand, we have to go back to October of last year, and that's when the White House, the executive branch, officially gave up on its effort to push legislation through Congress that would require technology companies, including Apple, to include backdoors on their products. And a backdoor is means to bypass security measures, including encryption on iPhones, but not just iPhones, but all phones and tablets and computers and even information on the cloud, to bypass that so the government, instead of having to crack the security, could just walk through that backdoor that's provided by the company. They gave up on that effort because of resistance from Congress, but as soon as they gave up on it, it was reported later by Bloomberg. There was a high level national security figures in the executive department gave out the directive that we need to go to Plan B and find other ways to bypass these security measures on electronic devices that protect privacy. And the San Bernardino case was one of those attempts, and there were other court cases, including one dealing with a methamphetamine dealer in a Brooklyn federal court. And in both those cases and others, the prosecutors were seeking ex parte, without Apple's involvement and ability to present its own side of the story, to have court orders issued to require Apple to provide assistance in cracking the security on those iPhones. In the San Bernardino case, the court did give the ex parte order, though Apple challenged it afterwards. In the Brooklyn case, things were handled differently, and the magistrate judge said Apple has to come in, present the arguments, and he ended up siding on Apple's side, saying they don't have to provide the technical assistance.
So ultimately, what we know now is that the FBI spent $1.3 million on what is referred to as a gray hat effort, i.e., they paid some hackers to get into this particular iPhone 5C. And it was pretty dramatic because it was on the night before Apple was to be compelled, I believe, to start doing this. The FBI all of a sudden dropped its request, saying, "Don't worry about it, we've got it covered. We've found a backdoor." So they've hired this hacker, they've paid this $1.3 million, and now they won't tell Apple or anyone else how they got in, who did the hacking. So it almost seems like a de facto defeat of encryption in toto. How do you see this dramatic turn of events from the FBI's perspective?
Well, and the spending was at least $1.3 million. That's the minimum that FBI Director James Comey said it was. It could be any amount higher. And it's in the beginning, when they first went after this iPhone of Syed Farouk in San Bernardino, they said it was all about this one phone and this one incident, and it was a great public relations play because it was terrorism. People are afraid there'll be another mass murder. So let's find out if we can stop that by getting into this phone. So any expense is okay. But then a few days later, speaking to the House Intelligence Committee, Comey admitted, well, this will be precedent in other cases. So they found a case that was very favorable to them that would stir up people's fear to try to create that precedent so that in the future they could go after drug dealers and tax evaders and whoever else they wanted to go after in the entire list of federal and state crimes. But what they really want is they want those back doors that they originally had, and this was a convenient PR way to go after it in this high-profile case.
It sounds so familiar to what happened after 9/11. In that case, you had a spectacular attack on U.S. soil, thousands of people killed, and the federal government used that as a pretext to begin spying on all of us through the NSA, to undermine our Fourth Amendment protections, to undermine our civil liberties. And who was going to say, stop doing it? It's a ticking time bomb scenario. No one would want to stand up and say, hey, don't do this. What, are you with the terrorists? But there's another very strong similarity with what happened after 9/11, and you alluded to it earlier, Adam, and that is this legislation that was on the shelf, ready to be pulled off the shelf and enacted. In the case of 9/11, it was the Patriot Act. It had been written, as everyone knows, years before. We could never get this thing passed. It's way too controversial. All of a sudden, you have the Pearl Harbor event, as the neocons called it. Well, there's a similar situation here with San Bernardino. You had this surveillance, you had this encryption bill that had been written. As you point out, it was too hot to handle in the Senate until a precipitating event, i.e. the San Bernardino attackers. And now all of a sudden we're talking about this legislation and no one is saying, hey, are you crazy? Don't do this. It's now just pushing through the Senate. If you can give us a little bit more on this legislation, Adam.
Well, last week, draft legislation was revealed that's sponsored by the chairman and vice chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. That's Senator Richard Burr, a Republican, and Senator Dianne Feinstein, a Democrat. And it's called the Compliance with Court Orders Act. And basically it says that there's a court order in all kinds of cases, not just terrorism, but cases where there's a threat of serious bodily injury to somebody, or a federal crime involving children, which could be many different things, or any serious drug case, then a court, and it's not just a federal court, it's a state court, a U.S. possession or territory court, an Indian nation court, any of those courts give an order to a technology-related company like Apple or Google or anybody else who provides technology products or services to provide them with intelligible information as well as assistance in obtaining intelligible information, then that order has to be followed. No longer will a company like Apple be able to do like it did in the San Bernardino case and in the Brooklyn case and present its arguments to the courts to say we don't have to do it. Instead, the law will say, you have to comply. And a worrisome thing is that in the Brooklyn case where the judge actually sided with Apple, he said at the end, what we really need here is a legislative solution. And the court shouldn't be handling this. He didn't say at the end, well, I've handled this on statutory grounds and decided for Apple, but it's probably unconstitutional. No, he said the Congress can basically do whatever it wants. If the Congress wants to say you have to have backdoors, that's fine. If the Congress says you can't have backdoors, that's fine. If the Congress wants to go somewhere in between, that's fine too. And the worrisome thing is if a statute like this one passes and other judges hold that same opinion, that will be the law. There won't be any challenge, and privacy protections will be largely nullified.
Yeah, Adam, that sounds a lot like politics instead of principles. Forget the Constitution, forget our privacy rights. There ought to be a law. In Congress, of course, one of the few times it's willing to step in, oh, you're right. If you look at some of the tech publications' coverage of the law, from their perspective, it is even more horrible than people would imagine. Wired, which is a very well-respected tech mag, said that the bill would make illegal the sort of user-controlled encryption that's in every modern iPhone and in dozens of other products. It outlaws end-to-end encryption. Digital Trends pointed out just this week, and this is the new version of the bill, so they're fixing it, right. It said the bill would force companies to place backdoors in their devices to undermine their own encryption and essentially to give the government the key to that backdoor. So what does this say about privacy in our so-called free society, Adam?
Well, it's disturbing, and luckily the bill is just a draft right now. It hasn't been introduced, and we don't know if it has the ability to pass in the Senate and the House. But there's reason to worry because last year there was a similar debate over the mass spying that was revealed by Edward Snowden. And what we ended up with was compromised legislation that was argued to be protecting of privacy while at the same time defending the security of people in the U.S. from terrorist attack. And that's the USA Freedom Act. Mm-hmm. But Michael Hayden, who was the head of the NSA, said after that act had passed that it was cool that legislation was passed because it allowed them to keep doing what they'd been doing before. And that's the best thing that could have happened for the people who want mass spying after 2 years of people looking at the Snowden revelations. So my worry is we have this Burr-Feinstein bill right now that is obviously terrible. Somebody's going to come up with a compromise legislation, and that legislation is going to allow the government to do pretty much everything it wants to do, and will be sold to the people as being actually to protect their privacy and their ability to have security on their electronic devices.
Yeah, it's absolutely Hegelian. The Hegelian, the dialectics are at work. The action, reaction, and synthesis is at work. But in the Patriot Act case, nobody seemed to notice that the same guy who wrote the Patriot Act was allowed to revise it and call it a solution that it actually made it worse. But Glenn Greenwald, who we follow closely and does a lot of terrific work, he came out with an article today, and I think this is important because we have to look at this whole thing in context. It's not about terrorism, it's not about terrorists, it's not about iPhones. It is about those, but the bigger context is what we have to keep in mind. What does it mean to live in a free society? And Greenwald wrote about a study that was done at Oxford, and it involved studying people's web search habits on WikiLeaks. And what it discovered is that the mere existence of surveillance state breeds fear and conformity, and it stifles free expression. What it showed was that people were afraid to search and read articles with keywords in them like terrorism, Al-Qaeda, Taliban. They were afraid to go there because they didn't want to end up on some list. So the question I think we need to answer, first of all, it also leads to an ignorant population. You put those things out, you don't even go there, don't even think about it. You have an uninformed population, it's going to be much more compliant with the government. Adam, what does this mean, this context mean to us as people who ostensibly live in a free society?
Well, you think back to, before the fall of the Soviet Union, and this was one of the major criticisms people had of the Soviet Union and Eastern Bloc countries such as East Germany, that there were these government informants, in their apartment building, down the block, across town, who would keep track of you and tell the government what you were doing. Well, now the government doesn't need these government informants. It can reach right into your personal life through your electronic communications and the information you have stored on your computer, your phone, and have a much more sweeping picture of your life than those informants ever could. You can't keep the secrets. So if you can't keep secrets, then you actually do close yourself off from finding new information, from studying things like in that study, doing a Wikipedia search related to terrorism. And so it's a very big restraint on freedom. It's along the lines of what the Supreme Court would call chilling for free speech, because if people are afraid to exercise free speech or afraid to listen to speech, then that itself can be seen as a restriction on First Amendment rights.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have to cut this conversation shorter than I'd like, But I can't let you go, Adam, without giving a plug for our beloved Ron Paul Institute and seeing maybe what you're up to. What are you working on today? What do you have that you're cooking up for our readers who we value so much?
Well, just this morning, I wrote an article about the House Armed Services Committee passing an amendment that's included in the National Defense Authorization Act that would actually expand draft registration for war to women as well as men. So there's plenty of bad things, I'm sure, in the NDAA, but that's one that's particularly worrisome. But probably tomorrow up on the Ron Paul Institute also will be my 8th episode of our new audio show, 5 minutes, 5 issues. And in those shows, I talk about, as the title suggests, 5 different issues of the day, and do it all in 5 minutes so people can hear it quickly. And some of the topics I'm considering for the show is a report from the Pentagon on how much the ISIS wars cost. Also, what Bernie Sanders is going to do after winning 4 out of 5 of the races earlier this week. The potential release of the 28 pages of a 9/11 report from the House and Senate that have been blocked since 2002 from being published. The potential of Hawaii decriminalizing drugs beyond marijuana, and the sentencing of Dennis Hastert recently in Illinois.
Well, that's a heck of a lot to put into 5 minutes, but it sure is convenient for people that want to get a snapshot and don't have a lot of time. Adam, I want to thank you for joining us on the show today. It's always great to talk about the issues that you follow so closely dealing with our civil liberties over at the Ron Paul Institute. And I also want to thank very much our viewers, our growing list of viewers and subscribers to the Ron Paul Liberty Report. If you like the show, please pass it around. Please go to our YouTube channel, Ron Paul Liberty Report, and subscribe to the show so you can find out exactly what we're doing and what we've been saying in the past. You can see how well we've been doing, if we've been right or off the mark. So thanks once again for joining us. Please come back soon.